was a significant year in terms of understanding the justice gap that exists the world over. Turning to our understanding of women's justice needs, men's justice needs in the transitional justice arena, I have to say that it's still rather disappointing that when we speak about gender and transitional justice, the likelihood is that we will think about sexual and gender-based violence. But in fact, the legacies of systemic violence predating conflict, during conflict, and post-conflict is more than sexualized violence. Dealing with sexualized violence or sexual and gender-based violence, we also tend to ignore the sexual violence that is perpetrated against boys and men. We are not dealing as well as we should be with the intersections of human rights violations. And these intersections range from forced displacement, the justice needs of refugee and internally displaced people, the justice needs of people who have been impoverished, the gendered dynamics of the human rights violations that occur in context of post-conflict recovery, and also the very, very dire needs of the institutions that are in recovery that are supposed to deliver on the transitional justice needs. These are all important aspects, I think, that we have to address if we're going to record progress moving forward. In 2019, the Africa Union adopted its Africa Union Transitional Justice Policy. Now, this policy recognizes the centrality of customary and traditional indigenous institutions of justice. It prioritizes the notions of reconciliation with accountability. The Africa Union Transitional Justice Policy also looks to repairing the social fabric that is often broken during conflict. It's an important development, but as it is being rolled out, I think it's important for us to ensure that, in fact, it addresses all the gendered needs of all Africans. We know for a fact that some of customary institutions and customary laws, for example, have not always been very supportive of the rights of women and children. Some of those mechanisms may not allow the participation in full equality of women and children, and therefore it is important that as this policy is rolled out, we do not bury our heads in the sand, but we in fact insist that it is implemented to achieve the end goals of transitional justice that it intends to address. The transitional justice measure of reparations is particularly important to women victims of systemic violence and human rights violations during times of conflict and in post-conflict periods. Women have often said that they would require that those reparation measures be implemented with their total participation during all stages, that is, during the design and during the implementation of reparations measures. It has often been that women are included but not included in a manner that is transformative, that they are included to make up the numbers, but they are not sitting on the policy table that, for example, decides how much resources are going to be expended in the reparations programs. They are not included in the design of these programs, and to which they are supposed to be beneficiaries. And this has often led to very unsatisfactory experience of reparations for women survivors and children victims of atrocities. Let me turn now to the question of the impunity gap. There's a huge impunity gap Transitional justice is supposed to address also the retributive aspect of crimes that are committed. But we have found that this has been one of the most difficult measures to implement. We have on occasion, many occasions, been unable to institute trials in countries that have experienced conflict, where the perpetrators have been identified, where truth commissions have conducted their work, issued reports. The implementation of those reports that call for the prosecution, the vetting and lustration of people who have been involved in directing mass atrocities or have been involved in the direct commission of offenses, has not happened. They have not been tried. They have not been brought to justice, even where the justice systems exist. The examples are legion. And I think we need to do better in terms of closing the impunity gap in transitional justice processes. In the recent past, we've begun to see a lot of reversals. Reversals in democratic governance, reversals in the respect for human rights, and we're seeing these reversals across the continent. We're beginning to see a lack of regard for multilateralism, and this is a very worrying trend. This means, therefore, that we must build our own, and we must insist that our own domestic justice mechanisms are able to respond in a timely manner to human rights violations. Whether these justice mechanisms are indigenous, formal, or international, we must, all of us, work towards making transitional justice work for the people. It's not just a concept, it's not just something that we theorize about, but we must ensure that it becomes a living reality. In post-conflict countries, we find that the priority of rebuilding the social fabric, rebuilding devastated infrastructure, rebuilding economies, tends to take precedence over individual justice needs of the people who have suffered during times of conflict. In countries which are recovering from many, many years of authoritarianism, justice needs of its citizens also tend to take a back seat, because peace then tends to become prioritized. And while peace is absolutely important, absolutely necessary, we must never ever conflate the needs of justice and the needs of peace, that we prioritize one over the other. We must find a way either of sequencing the application of TJ measures so that we are able to claim the promise of transitional justice that delivers both peace and justice.